All right. Thanks for everybody joining us. I'm just going to leave a few minutes for people to join the invite. At any stage, Mary or the team, just let me know if the sound is not coming right. Just conscious my connection sometimes just drops in and out. I hear plenty. All right, so we got 44 on the call. I think as of the end of last week, we had about 120, 130 people signed in. So I'll give it a couple more minutes. It's your last chance to grab a little tea or coffee before we kick off. $62 still coming up. Just what for another 2-3 minutes. Thanks for joining those on the call already. A few more minutes. ID, getting in the 80s, that's good. Let's kick off when we get to 100, hopefully in a couple of minutes. Oh, yep, thanks, Michael. There you go, better? All right. So I kicked off the recording, so that first few minutes is not going to be greatly interesting for those who are missing the meeting, but hopefully we can take that out after. All right, I guess we got 96 people on the call. Mary, what do you reckon? Should I kick off? Yeah? All right.
Yep, let's go.
All right. Well, many thanks for all joining us today for this Modern Slavery Risk Masterclass. I'm very conscious I'm the only person standing between now and your lunch, so I'll try to make this as painless as possible, and hopefully you'll find that interesting and engaging the conversation we're just going to have. But before I kick off, I'd like to begin by acknowledging and paying my respect to the Bundjalung people, the traditional custodians of the land on which I live and stand today to deliver this training. I would also like to pay my respect to their elders, past and present and emerging, and also acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders present on the call today and pay my respects to your elder, past, present, and emerging as well. So my name is Bastian. I'm a responsible sourcing and modern slavery specialist here at IAG, and I work in the procurement, partnering, and commercial team. And I'll be your presenter and facilitator for the day. We want this session to be as interactive as possible. We're not going to have breakout rooms or anything like that, but please utilize the chat. I'll prompt you guys as we go through this training to utilize to just do that. And yeah, let's make it engaging. If you have any question or if the sound doesn't come through correctly or the image or anything, just please drop a comment in the chat and we'll try to sort that out as soon as possible. So before we start, when we talk about modern slavery, so as you can see, I put a couple of titles there. I have Modern Slavery Risk Masterclass and the what, the why, and how we manage modern slavery risk to the people. So before we dive into it, I just want you to just apply a little bit of a mindset exercise. I know typically when we talk about risk in a company context or in a business context, we think about risk to the company, risk to the business. In everything, when we talk about business and human rights or business and modern slavery, we really tend to focus on risk to the people, and the business then has that just that position of being the influencer of that risk. So as we go through this process, just try to not forget about all that you've learned in terms of enterprise risk management, it's still very relevant, but just change that lens slightly, and we start by focusing on the people a little bit more than the business in terms of priority, if that makes sense. And Mary, Michael, team, let me know if comments come through. Just please cut me off and ask me questions, etc., as we go along. And for everybody on the chat, that's perfectly fine as well. Just put comments as we progress. All right. So what are we going to cover today? Today we're going to talk a little bit of a background and definitions about what we see is modern slavery. We'll also go after that into a bit of a why is modern slavery relevant to IJ, which I think it's a very relevant question that many of you guys have. And if it's relevant, then how can we, as in people in this call, manage this risk? And we'll try to leave a little bit of time free to do a bit of a Q&A if you have some more questions for us. And also, I'll leave a couple of minutes to fill out the survey, the feedback form. All right, but before we dive, as you can see, I have a little picture here on the right side of a desk. It's not my desk, though it could be my desk, because I think my desk is more messy than that. But the idea here is for each one of you to pick an item here and try to think about that item as we go through the presentation today, and think about how you can relate what you're learning on the call today to that particular item, the components of that item, etc. And we'll revisit those choices. I mean, not every individual choices, obviously, but we'll revisit a little bit that image at the end of the prezo, and hopefully you'll find something useful that you can take home with you in addition to the work conversation we're having now. So what is modern slavery? So most of the time when we see it, it's most likely just characterized in the news in some big shocking titles about some labor conditions being forefront of a newspaper. So as you can see, I've put some titles here on the screen, which are relatively recent. Some of them a bit older, just to illustrate what sort of news we see coming up in relation to modern slavery. And there's a bit of a logic here in that screen. I know it's a bit messy, but basically, if you start with the Economist one, well, you can see that they say that supply chain is based on modern slavery. Supply chain based modern slavery may reach into the West, meaning supply chains that are originating in countries that are less developed may reach into the West in terms of products and services. Digging into that article, what you find is that they have reports that industries most affected by modern slavery, originating in less developed, I guess, economies, are computers, mobile phone, clothing, fishing, cocoa, sugarcane. So stuff that we use every day. Second article down, you see Apple and Google named in the US lawsuit over Congolese child cobalt mining death. So that's relatively recent, and that's not uncommon to see big names linked to modern slavery lawsuits or human rights abuse and all that. I mean, these giant tech companies literally have activities everywhere in the world and are sourcing a huge amount of material from a lot of different places. So we tend to see these articles, and often we're stuck with, okay, well, what do we do about it? How do we go away from that? So hold that thought. I mean, we'll talk a little bit more about that. I try to focus these names and these articles more on sort of the tech sort of profile for this session, as it's really centered to the team that's on the call today, a lot of you guys. So just trying to pick some titles relevant there, but you could pretty much in each different teams and industries, you could pretty much find something that is relevant to that particular industry. On the left side, you most likely have issues that are relating to international supply chain. And like that first article says, international supply chain that originate in less developed economies. But that's not to say, as the right side of the screen shows, that modern slavery is not present as well. It doesn't originate directly in Australia too. A couple of years ago, there were quite a bit of issue issue around the. Yeah.
Can you please turn off the beeping?
Yeah,
thank you.
How do I do that?
If you
Basti, you just need to select participant up the top, and then it's got entry and exit tones with a tick next to it.
Stop, tuck. Sorry, I'm a bit challenged. Here. Sound alerts. Yeah, I mean, it's all off at the moment.
So Bastian, right up the top where you've got file, edit, share, view, audio and video, and then participant. If you
it might be slightly different
yeah.
because he's on share view.
Got it. But it's just the tick against entry and exit tone.
Yeah. All right. Let me just unshare for a second. Participant. Okay. All right. I think I get it. Sorry about that, guys.
Crossed.
Let me share back my screen. Second screen. Here we go. Okay. All right. I think we're good. All right. Sorry about that. I was just in the zone. That wasn't even impacting me. I wasn't hearing it.
All good, Bastian. And we've got your slide back up as well.
Yeah, cool. All right. So back to my cleaning contractors. So yeah, a couple of years ago, some of these cleaning companies, major group, have been in a bit of the radar of the news and the NGOs in Australia. That was even before modern slavery came in the radar, has sort of exploiting the workers, especially migrant workers who didn't necessarily understand their rights, couldn't really speak English very well, minimum wage workers, so really prone to these sorts of exploitation. But that got picked up. A lot of work has been done since then, but still, it's an area to consider. And where it becomes a little bit more complicated as well is when we have convoluted relationship with our contractors, when we don't manage the suppliers ourselves, where some of the contractors manage workforce for us, or when they subcontract and outsource themselves. So that's the type of characterization of modern slavery you see in the news, sort of on a very fairly common basis. What is modern slavery? So this is the textbook definition of what we consider modern slavery. I'll just read it out loud. It's modern slavery practices are major violation of human rights and serious crimes. Modern slavery practices include trafficking in persons, slavery-like practices, including forced labor, forced marriage, and the worst form of child labor, including using children for prostitution and in hazardous work. So that might appear full on, but it's the formal definition that came with the Modern Slavery Act. So that's the law that passed back in 2018, which requires certain companies like IAG who have a revenue threshold above $100 million per year to report on their activities to identify potential risk and describe the actions they're taking to respond to these risks, basically. So it does appear a bit full on. What's to really retain from that definition is that often I get the question about, well, how does that, where do we draw the line between a simple sort of working condition issues like I'm not happy with my contract, I don't think that's fair, which is not a modern slavery issues. It's essentially the idea of coercion or threat, where the person is locked in a system where they can't get out of, and they get threatened by if they get out of, the idea of deception as well. So this is really something where you feel really imprisoned into a system. Some stats of modern slavery around the world. So global estimate of 40 million people in modern slavery around the world. So that's almost twice the population of Australia, I think. So that's a pretty big number. In Asia Pacific alone, we see a big share of that, 30.4 million of people in modern slavery. And in Australia, it's a sort of low risk area. But we still find, or we still estimate that we have 15,000 people in Australia and New Zealand in a state of modern slavery, and in most cases, this touches on the migrant population. Again, for the reasons that I stated earlier. I mean, I found another stat I found quite fascinating in terms of, well, why do we have so much modern slavery? Why is that sort of happening around the world? I mean, the simple answer is that it's a very lucrative business. We have estimates that the market of modern slavery, so the work that's being done in that way and the trafficking, etc., is generating about $150 billion a year. So there is quite an incentive for people to keep it that way and to even keep going. So why is all of that relevant to IAG? So we're talking about that. Often the comments that we get is, well, how do we? It's interesting to know on the macro level, but why is it important to a company like IAG, which is in Australia and is solely fair low risk area and etc. So here are some of the common drivers that are relevant to IAG. So like I mentioned a little bit earlier, there is strengthening regulation in all around the world. So the Modern Slavery Act in Australia is one of these regulation, and Australia is at the forefront of these sorts of regulation, but it's not the only country that has implemented some disclosure regulation around identifying the risk of modern slavery, disclosing what companies are doing to limit the risk of modern slavery, etc. So the UK has had their own version of the Modern Slavery Act since 2015. France has had one as well since 2018. California has had one for a while. It's called the Transparency in Supply Chain Act. So there's popping up a regulation around how do we regulate this idea of global supply chain and trying to minimize the risk of exploitation of us just simply buying cheap produce and services from areas where these are coming from, where labor is cheap, essentially. So it's strengthening regulation, which really forces companies nowadays to really look into that. In Australia alone, the Modern Slavery Act probably touches around 3,000 of the biggest companies. So that has ramifications, that has implications. There also, in the last 20 years, we've seen an increase in information availability with the internet, social media, social networks, etc. Essentially, what happens today in Southeast Asia in terms of exploitation, if using the right channel, can be known in a few hours on the other side of the planet. So there is that idea about, well, it's really fluid in terms of information nowadays. And that is creating as well changing social expectations. So we see an increased scrutiny from investors. We see an increased scrutiny from lenders. Employees themselves want to work for responsible companies, and the wider community as well, meaning consumers essentially are more and more prone to buy products that they feel comfortable with in terms of where it's coming from. We've seen that in the last 10 years. I mean, a good parallel is looking at environmentally responsible products. So we've seen that quite a bit. People are more and more conscious about greenhouse gas emissions, about plastics, about these sort of things in the last few years. And now we're starting to see that as well on the social side, where people are starting to ask the question, okay, well, if I can buy this t-shirt for $3, so what does that mean? Like, where is that coming from? Who made that t-shirt? It's people are starting to ask those questions, and underpinning or underlying all of these sort of trends in the last couple of years, we've had COVID-19 as well, which impacts quite a bit modern slavery in an exacerbating way. Basically, people were already prone to vulnerabilities, especially on the financial side, on the other side of the world, because of irregularities now in the supply chain. Many factories have closed down and or moved or have quite a bit of changes, and that means that people were depending on these daily paychecks. Had quite a bit of irregularities. So that means that they potentially had to put their children to work, etc. So really creating again an exacerbating situation. It's not an easy word to say. Are we exposed? I guess that's the biggest question. So the literature on modern slavery tells us that there are some recognizable factors that tell us if we are potentially exposed. So essentially saying, well, if we are, or if we buy from a high-risk locations, for instance. A high-risk location or a geography or jurisdiction is a location where, say, the rule of law is too weak to be able to uphold good standard of working conditions. So we see that in Africa, South America, and Southeast Asia, where the law is there. There is often really well-developed sort of legal framework, but there's no monitoring of it. There is no implementation of it. There is no penalty for not respecting it. And that's where we see the role of the government fall a little bit because of lack of resources and creating these situations where people are being exploited despite the legal system that is in place in some of these jurisdictions. High-risk product and services. So by now we know that some products and services, for all of these factors or various reasons, are more prone to exploitation. So essentially, there are products that we know are very labor intensive, coming from, again, places with weak rule of laws, where people are potentially being exploited, and again, services as well that are labor intensive, minimal wage, these sort of things. So we can pin down to some industries and some services that are quite a bit more prone to exploitation. Third-party management, that has to do with the convoluted nature of some of our contracting arrangements as well, meaning that we don't just buy a service or product from this very well-identified supplier, and that's all there is to it. Often it's a convoluted relationship between a contractor, a subcontractor, outsourcing, somebody who manages contracts for us, etc., etc. Excuse me. And again, all of these factors are a bit overlapping, very conscious of that, but it gives us some directions. And then underpinning all of these are at the center of it. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning, everything is really centered on the person, on the people when we talk about modern slavery. So really underpinning all of these factors is worker vulnerability. By that, we mean that certain people are more prone to being exploited than others. People that are in situation of minimum wage, don't speak the local language, are migrant workers, for instance, depending on visas. So there's ways for employers to pressure them, or others, etc., etc. So some people are really more vulnerable to these sorts of factors. And again, please utilize the chat. I'm not checking it often, so just counting on you, Mary, Michael, if something comes up that people want to ask. So what do you think? When you think about these factors, and you think about your day-to-day job or the stuff you buy for IG, or what you see being done, what do you think are some of the areas where we could potentially be at risk or have higher exposure to modern slavery type scenarios? I'll give you a couple of minutes, or maybe a minute, to just pop in a few ideas in the chat, and then we go from there. I think the beeping is now off officially. Yes, Nick, and any particular claims in particular, any particular areas of supply chain for claims?
I think it's just a general risk, isn't it, in terms of the people that we rely on to provide us with replacement items.
Yeah, no, that's right,
and it's quite generic.
Yeah, it is the replacement items that say in the supply chain claims, and it could be as well some of the labor involved as well. Say in sort of like the less specialized labor, which is more minimum wage labor. I'm thinking about motor repairs potentially in some areas, or smash repair, these sort of things potentially. Does that make any sense? Promotional item, yeah. Office supplies, right? Call center, claim service, yeah, Zivan, definitely. Clothing, yeah, yeah, Alex, and yeah, how would that relate to IG potentially, like uniforms we have with our names on it, etc.
We've also got on there IT and technology that we purchase.
Oh, yep. No, good call out, Mary. Thanks. Yeah, IT hardware, most likely for sure. And again, with all of that, we're not saying there is modern slavery. That's not the idea. That's not the message. What we're saying is that when you look at these items, you look at these risk factors that are well known, you're thinking, well, this potentially an area of exposure. And the whole trick is to, well, where is our highest exposure, and to start working on implementing some controls, etc., and opening those conversations. Chocolate and coffee. Yeah. Yep. Cacao, yeah, and coffee for sure. All right. So I'll just go to next, and I'll show you what we've worked on for the past say, I think safe to say for the past couple of years we've applied those factors, looked at data, looked at some of the areas, trying to group these items in sort of the procurement categories we're looking at, what the data is showing us as well. And again, here's not to say that we've identified there's modern slavery within those items. Here's just to say we've identified, and within these categories, let's put potentially more exposures than in other areas of our supply chain. So what what I'm showing here is the corporate supply chain. So put the claim supply chain on the side for a second. And what we've identified is that in our corporate supply chain, well, we purchase labor services, and we have offshore partners for call centers. We have onshore care workers, agencies, property maintenance. People provide security, cleaning, catering services. We have a lot of information and communication technology products, hardware, software, cloud services, sponsorships, promotional items, and event associated activities. Also, so a lot of them you've already mentioned. And the idea is to say, well, which in these items, which of them, which factors are impacting those items that we say they are potentially more exposed. So again, I'll give you just a few seconds. Is that the geographical area? Is that the actual products in themselves, which are probably more prone? Is that the convoluted contracting relationship? Is that because we think there's so many vulnerable people within all these items? So just again, pop in the chat what you think. Like, is it which of these sort of factors is the reason that these items are more exposed to modern slavery? And thanks, Stacy. I see that you say, well, we now have sanctions management to identify any client with sanctions against them. Yeah, no, that's right. Unfortunately, modern slavery is not. I mean, it's a how do I say this? It's a crime, of course. But when we talk about sanctions, usually it's more for like an established some particular area. A particular list that the government has provided, where modern slavery doesn't necessarily figure on that officially at the moment. But of course, if there is a crime that's been committed for modern slavery, I'm sure will come up, but not if there is necessarily an allegation or potential higher risk or something like this. Yeah, people-centric type produce goods or supplied services. Geographical area. Yeah, I guess the idea behind this page is to say, well, in some ways, shape or form, there's probably all of these factors that are relevant to these hotspots area. You could find geographical areas, for instance, for the ICT products. Where are they coming from? You could find as well for some of the goods not for resale, so the stationaries, the office supplies. A lot of these categories, most of these categories are actual services or products that are more prone to modern slavery if you follow the literature. In many of these, we have correlated business relationships or a contractual relationship, especially thinking labor services. And in many of these, you will find people with vulnerabilities. So that's why when we look at 3,000 suppliers, say in a corporate supply chain, we can't take just one factor in isolation because it will come up as a factor will probably come up in any of the item we purchase. So we can't have 3,000 risky products or services. So we have to find a way to combine these factors and to prioritize what we're looking after. So that's why the hotspot you're looking at, they're probably hotspot or products and services where we find there is a combination of all these factors that make it that these products are more prone to modern slavery. To the next page. I'm just checking the time quickly. I think we're good. So as a bit of an aside, we do have tools that we use, the team at IAG to help us identify those areas of higher risk, of hotspots. So it's not just us applying, if you will, like a judgment call or looking at literature and really, trying to make sense of it. We also have tools that help us in looking after and identifying those hotspots. So, for example, sorry for the quality of the screenshots, but the example we're looking at is HP. So this program we're using, for instance, in this instance, tells us that HP is a supplier of us. It is in the ICT, electronics industry, and we buy about, we buy about 13 different items from HP, including notebook computers, the one sitting on probably on your desk at the moment. Out of these, sorry. 13 notebook computers. This supplier we know from the program is in a high-risk industry. We also know that from the literature. Interestingly enough, we don't buy from many different locations. We buy from probably a distributor in Australia and potentially manufacturer or distributor in China as well, which, as you can see, China doesn't even rate as a very high risk location in this instance. It rates as the medium location. China has been in such the radar for such a long time that they do have quite a bit of monitoring systems in place now. The risk is most coming from Southeast Asia, Africa, South America nowadays. It also tells us that this program, so it's a probability-based program. So it's not factual. We haven't gone to all of these different components to identify that. That would be a humongous work. But what that program does is telling us that if we buy a notebook computer, it's most likely that it contains many different components, and it's most likely that all of these components, or each of these components, come from specific locations. So in this instance, I've just drilled down in notebook computers. I'm looking at liquid crystal displays, the LCD panels or the monitors, which contain resistors, which in their turn are made from tin oxide. And the tin oxide is probability speaking, is most likely coming from Bolivia, Congo, Indonesia, Rwanda at more than 80% probability, and 80% probability that it's coming from low-risk countries. So fair to say that notebook computers, for instance, is a sort of a risky product potentially. So what do we do with this information? And that's the trick, right? What this information gives us is an evidence-based process to be able to apply a risk-based system for us to prioritize what we go after. And that's really what we're looking at. We couldn't possibly go after 30,000 products or 3,000 products or 4,000 products and services that we purchase on an annual basis. But what we can do is use evidence-based, risk-based logic to be able to drill down into some of our riskiest products and apply some controls. So that was a bit of an aside, but I'll keep going on the hotspot sort of logic. So now we're back in the claim supply chain risk hotspot. So again, thinking through the risk factors that we talked about before. I'll put them on the screen. The geographical, the products/services, the convoluted contracting, the vulnerable population factor. When looking at these, at the areas of hotspot we've identified, which one do you think are more prevalent? I mean, I think you're starting to get the gist of it. That most of them are probably relevant because that's why we identify them as hotspots. So I'll just show you maybe less so geographical in this instance, though it's debatable because of the products that we are buying through our claims supply chain services, like the lubricants, the oils, the batteries, the glass. So many of these products have already been in hot waters for modern slavery issues. But we certainly have, there are certainly products and services that are more prone to modern slavery risk. Again, especially in our claim supply chain. I mean, we have the luck in, I guess, in the the insurance business to have an additional complexity there, which is the consumer choice, and that's still something the team are really striving to see how we could tackle from the most effective way, because we don't have direct relationship, we don't control these suppliers or customers pick those suppliers. So there's a bit of an added complexity there on how we influence that, which is fine. I mean, it's not a race. We'll get there eventually, but it's up to us to see how we influence those choices. And finally, so it's not just supply chain. When we talk about our risk hotspot, and that's the beauty of the Modern Slavery Act. It does ask you to look into what you buy, but also into what you do, who you are, where you are. So in our case, it would also ask us to look into our operations or employees. Do we ourselves are potentially in a position that we ourselves exploit our own employees? Because we are in New Zealand and Australia, probably less so, but still, we need to be careful about our minimum wage worker, or casual worker, or apprentice worker, or base skill workers, etc., etc. Just making sure we have all the right controls in place. And it's not just the people we hire and people who work for our group, but also the investments that we make in our case, because we are also an investment organization. So are we investing in entities that are potentially putting people at risk of modern slavery? And that's the question. So we are working with our investment teams, capital assets, to make sure that and then they have been doing some great work in that space to make sure that they apply some due diligence in investments that we pick. But again, the logic is the same. Are we in any situations where we combine these factors? And that's where we need to be careful. Just doing a quick time check. I think we're still good. Again, pop in some comments if some things don't make sense at all. Just wanted to end that little session, that section of the presentation on the IAG risk appetite statement. So earlier this year, we've actually formalized into the IAG risk appetite statement the opposition in relation to modern slavery and how we will not tolerate modern slavery. And as with any enterprise risk management framework, it is a question of, well, there's potentially here a risk that if we find ourselves in a situation where there is an allegation that we are involved in a modern slavery case, that it will impact on some aspect of our company. And I guess the question here is, will it impact on customer and community? Will it impact on our own people? Will it impact on the regulatory, legal sort of implications? Would it impact on our financials? Would it impact on our reputation? Maybe have a quick go, put a few thoughts. No thoughts? Yep, all right, reputation, most likely. All right, can feel the lunch is getting near. So the case here, the question here is probably going to impact on more than one category. It's probably it's probably going to impact on more than one category. So there will be implication on the financial aspect as well. If your reputation is impacted, there could be some reputation on the financial side as well. It could impact on our share price, for instance. It could impact on the fact that people will find less attractive to work for a company that's been involved in those sorts of activities. I've done quite a bit of consulting in my past life and consulting on human rights implications for companies, and one aspect that people or companies were really interested in is simply the amount of time that an executive level team will spend in doing damage control if ever the company is brought into any sorts of allegation, etc. So it's a lot of time spent in there, and that's definitely not something that execs should be spending their time on. All right. So how can we manage the risk? So after we've seen that it could be relevant to IJ, what's our role in managing that risk? Well, we've made some commitments. So we have some policy level commitments already from the top. The social and environmental framework has a clear human rights commitment. The Code of Ethics and Conduct also have reference to all human rights commitments, or modern slavery as well as position. Our group procurement policy makes some reference to that as well. As I mentioned earlier, we've included some requirement in all responsible investment policies and processes as well, and even in our mergers and acquisitions process, we have a due diligence process where we look into human rights potential issues in the entities we're considering buying or merging into. So we have that top level, but yeah, policies. It's nice at that top level, but how do we? Oops, sorry. How do we actually implement those? So we've already gone to that layer down, and that's probably the layer where you people on this call will be more interested in. And this is the IG Supplier Code of Conduct, for instance, which is available online and includes all of our expectations. So not just modern slavery, but also ESG in more general. So environment, social, governance expectations of our suppliers. What do we expect them to do in relation to this? We have our standard contracts as well, and purchase order terms. So we've already done a round of review where we integrated modern slavery clauses to that. So legally, we have something we can lean on already when in our conversation with our suppliers. There is as well as simple as engaging with suppliers and vendors. And I know you guys, and probably not, all of you really are comfortable with the topic, and that's why we have this team that you can lean on to have those conversations, prepare your conversation with suppliers, ask us which question to ask them. I'm really happy to support in that sense. I kept this first one for later because that's one that's currently in play and really interesting to us. So we've been conducting some responsible business assessments with our suppliers. Some of you will be familiar with this process. It has been a bit of a parallel process to the segmentation process and to the risk assessment process as well. Now, what we've been working on is with the RQ team is to integrate that process as business as usual in the new vendor risk management process to make it more seamless, to make it more fluid, and hopefully to be more easy to implement. So the guidance is provided as well within that whole process, which is being rolled out in the next month or so, and I think in the next few months, if not the next 12 months, in terms of adopting these new systems. But there will be say a standard consideration of modern slavery risk within this process. The guidance is integrated in there, but again, if anything is unclear, it's like everything. We're just starting out a process, so if everything is not clear, we need to know, and we're really happy to help and to work on this as we progress as a team. And then if you see something that you're not comfortable with, you hear something, you have the whistleblower line, and that's a line that's been leveraged for modern slavery as well. That all teams are ready to use to accommodate modern slavery type issues. We have some resources as well. that are available to you guys, to our suppliers. So we have a supplier portal that's publicly available. To our key, I guess, category manager, we have a supplier alert system where every day our team receives alerts from all over the world, news media, etc., in relation to industries and suppliers, and we filter that, trickle it back to category managers to tell them, well, watch out, this supplier has been, in the news this day or last week for, A, B, C, D reason, and that includes labor, working condition, modern slavery type of issues. We also have an anti-slavery training available on Success Plus. So we've had that since last year. We haven't really communicated grandly the actual training because of all the restructure and all that. So we put a bit of a hold on that, but it's very relevant. It's not going to be doubling up too much with these sessions we're doing now. There's some scenario type activities that are really interesting. Please have a look, play around with it. It's only half an hour. It's really meant for people, again, to build awareness. It's a cool little training. And then there is our team, the procurement quality and compliance team, sitting within the procurement partner and commercial, which are here to help and really happy to discuss the topic. We're just composed of a bunch of very motivated and passionate people about this topic. All right, so before we go to the Q&A, I thought we'd go back quickly to the items that you picked. And what I wanted to do with that item that you picked, and hopefully you had a bit of a think through whilst we went through the session about this item and how it went, what it was made out of, what if the factors that we looked at, the risk factors potentially involved in that. Cup of coffee, that's the one I was going to pick. Mary, good. But yeah, definitely. So there are stuff, and we wanted to leave you guys with something you can take home as well. So modern slavery is not just something to think about at home or applying to the company. Like I said, it's really, in the end of the day, it's really the consumer making the difference. So it's you, it's me, it's everybody, and it's always something I guess good to sort of try to reflect on. But it's a journey. It will take some time to really ask the right question and do the research. For instance, I picked up coffee on my desk, something I drink every day. Coffee is something that historically has been really entrenched in slavery, not just modern slavery, but back in Brazil in slavery time. That was one of the main crop, being farmed with slavery. Today, it is still the cocoa in South America and in Africa is still a crop that is riddled with modern slavery. There's new, I guess, the modern slavery aspect of it is now, I guess, typical situation would be a situation where a family travels to a new village to get some work. They get offered board, accommodation, food, etc. to work on the plantation, but they can never make enough money to reimburse the accommodation and the food and the boarding, etc. So they find themselves trapped. And it's not an uncommon situation. So there are ways for us as consumers to have a bit of a think about that. So the first would simply be to go on your favorite company website for coffee and then just have a look into what they are disclosing. That's the beauty of the Modern Slavery Act, because it forces big companies to disclose. So now you can go on there and you can see, for the biggest companies, I guess, but still you can see what they're doing in terms of risk assessment, what they're doing in terms of responsible sourcing, what they're doing in terms of monitoring that there's no modern slavery. And if you're not happy with what you find there, then you can have a look at another company and see what they disclose. And you have also labels. Fair trade is probably something that most of you are familiar with, but have a look at the label, what it stands for, etc. Fair trade is one of the labels that stand for fair social sort of responsibility. And you find a lot of coffee that is fair trade, etc. So it's all up to individual choices in the end. So I put some suggestions up there, but yeah, supporting companies with transparent supply chain, looking up products or industry brands on NGO watchdog organization, considering buying fair trade, considering buying survivor-made goods as well. That's a new sort of market developing, which is quite interesting in my mind. but plenty of ways for you guys to take that sort of understanding and knowledge home. And finally, have a little something you can do on your own time. But there's an interesting little app called Slavery Footprint. It probably takes about, I don't know, let's say 15 minutes to complete, and it tells you how many slaves are working for you. So I did it. I got 2 kids. And it turns out I got 42 slaves working for me. So sort of taken aback with that. So, but yeah, it's I'm not sure exactly what science is exact behind the whole algorithm there, but it's just a sort of an awareness thing, and it's an interesting, very engaging way to get into these sorts of thinking. All right. I think that's pretty much it. A few more resources. We'll make the slides available, the recording as well. Again, as I said, don't hesitate to send us an email. There's various channels to reach us. Some of them are including here. And I'll put up a Q&A. So just if you have questions, how long would you have? We have 5 minutes left. All right, so just a couple of minutes for questions, and then a couple of minutes, Michael, if you want to pop in the link for the actual feedback survey.
Absolutely.
That'd be great.
And Baz, we've got a question
Thanks
there
a lot,
asking
Michael.
about Survivor Made as well.
Yep. So what constitutes Survivor Made? So it's victim centric. So people who have been in situation of modern slavery, who have gone out of it. So there's various organizations, NGOs that are just looking after that, and they most of the time they do these little craft or products. Again, previous victims of modern slavery, and that money usually goes back into the organization to help victims of modern slavery. So it's really that the idea, I think. Well, thank you, Suzanne. All right. Well, like I said, please don't hesitate to reach out to us outside of this masterclass. We're always eager to engage and understand as well, because it's a lot of it has to do with us as the modern slavery sort of specialist within IAG, to understand exactly how we buy stuff, how we go about these relationships. So it's a continuing work that our team does, and really trying to identify what the best controls are, if they're not already there. In some instances, controls will already be there that you don't even realize you implement. So yeah, keep that in mind. Reach out to us, and thank you so much for coming on this training today. And now you can go to lunch.
Thanks, Bastian. Great session.
Thank you.
Guys.
Thanks, Baz.
Oh my God, we have 3 minutes left. What are we going to do with all this time?
Still can't get over I had 38 slaves, Baz.
38 slave.
I know.
Can't believe I'm the modern slavery specialist. I got 42.
I expect better of you, Baz, but that's okay.
I know, me too. I think it's the kids. I think it's all the kids' fault.
I think it might have been the Xbox that pushed my numbers up as well, Baz. Just saying.
Yeah.
It's all the tech the kids have.
That's very, very, very likely.
Hey, Bastian, are we able to ask people to enter in the survey on your masterclass? The link's in the chat, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So for the next 2 minutes, if we could please get some feedback, that'd be great.
Yeah. No, right. yeah, I did mention it a bit earlier, but if you guys can click on the link and actually fill the survey with the last 2 minutes, that'd be amazing. Thanks for the reminder. Do I get to fill the survey myself?
No. You'll skew the
Don't-
results, Baz.
Okay, I won't.
You should stop sharing your screen though, Baz.
Yep. All right, so I'll stop the recording now, and thank you so much, guys, for your time today. Hopefully you found the session valuable, interesting, and engaging. Can't wait to do some of this stuff face to face. It's always a bit more interactive when you get to do a bit of a workshop. But hey, with what we have at the moment.
Thanks so much, Baz.
Thanks,
Great
Baz.
session.
Thanks, Bastian.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Thanks, Baz.
Thank you.
Have a good day, guys.